Muhammad Yunus, a name that has resonated across boardrooms, village huts, university lecture halls, and the grand chambers of the United Nations, stands as one of the most extraordinary figures of the modern era. Born in the obscurity of a small village in colonial Bengal, he rose through decades of academic brilliance, humanitarian passion, and relentless social innovation to become a Nobel laureate, a global icon of economic justice, and ultimately the head of government of one of the world's most populous nations. His journey is not merely a biographical account of personal achievement. It is a living testament to what one individual can accomplish when conviction meets compassion, and when ideas are brave enough to challenge the status quo. Early life. The village that shaped a visionary. Muhammad Yunus was born on June 28, 1940, in the small village of Batwa, located near the Kaptai Road in Hathazari, Chittagong district, in what was then the Bengal Presidency of British India, today's Bangladesh. He was the third of 9 children born to a Bengali Muslim family. His father, Haji Muhammad Dullah Miya Saudagar, was a Sufi jeweler by trade, and his mother, Sufia Khatun, was a deeply compassionate woman whose own charitable instincts toward the poor left a profound impression on the young Muhammad. In 1944, when Yunus was just 4 years old, the family relocated to the city of Chittagong, where his father's jewelry business was based. The move from village to city exposed the young Yunus to a far wider world. He enrolled in the Lamabazar Primary School and later attended the prestigious Chittagong Collegiate School, where he proved himself to be an exceptional student. In the matriculation examination, he achieved the 16th highest score among approximately 39,000 students across East Pakistan, a staggering performance that announced the arrival of a formidable intellect. His childhood was not limited to the classroom. As a young man, Yunus was an active member of the Boy Scouts, an experience that took him far beyond the borders of his own country. He traveled to West Pakistan and India in 1952, to Europe, the United States, and Canada in 1955 for a World Scouts Jamboree, and to the Philippines and Japan in 1959. Travels that gave him a global perspective at an age when most of his peers had barely ventured beyond their own districts. These early international experiences seeded in him an understanding of the world's diversity, its inequalities, and its possibilities. Academic excellence. From Dhaka to Vanderbilt. After completing his intermediate studies at Chittagong College, Yunus enrolled in 1957 in the Department of Economics at the University of Dhaka, one of the most storied institutions in the subcontinent. He completed his Bachelor of Arts degree in Economics in 1960 and earned his Master of Arts degree the following year in 1961. Upon graduation, he joined the Bureau of Economics at the University of Dhaka as a research assistant before being appointed as a lecturer in economics at Chittagong College, a role that marked his formal entry into academia. During this period, he also demonstrated entrepreneurial instincts by co-founding a small but profitable packaging factory. The defining academic chapter of Yunus's life began in 1965 when he was awarded a prestigious Fulbright scholarship to pursue doctoral studies in the United States. He enrolled at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee, an institution known for its strong economics program, and threw himself into advanced study with characteristic intensity. He earned his PhD in economics from Vanderbilt in 1969. Completing a rigorous doctoral program that sharpened his theoretical understanding of development economics, poverty, and financial systems. Following the completion of his doctorate, Yunus joined Middle Tennessee State University in Murfreesboro, Tennessee as an assistant professor of economics, a position he held from 1969 to 1972. It was during these years in the United States that Yunus confronted one of the most transformative events of his life. The Bangladesh Liberation War erupted in 1971, a brutal conflict in which East Pakistan fought for independence from West Pakistan. Thousands of miles away in Nashville, Yunus felt the anguish of his homeland deeply. Rather than remaining a passive observer, he channeled his grief and determination into action. He founded a citizens' committee in Nashville, published a newsletter called the Bangladesh Newsletter, and ran the Bangladesh Information Center in Washington, D.C., working alongside other Bangladeshis living in the United States to lobby the U.S. Congress to halt military aid to Pakistan and to build international support for his people's liberation. This episode reveals an aspect of Yunus's character that would define his entire life, an unwillingness to remain a bystander in the face of injustice. Return to Bangladesh. The birth of a mission. When Bangladesh finally achieved independence in December 1971, Yunus felt the magnetic pull of his homeland irresistibly drawing him back. In 1972, he returned to Bangladesh and joined the economics department of the University of Chittagong as head of department, choosing a life of service over the comparative comfort and security that a continued academic career in America might have offered. The newly independent Bangladesh was a country of immense promise and immense suffering. It had won its freedom at a terrible cost. An estimated 3 million people had died in the Liberation War, millions more had been displaced, and the nation's fragile economy lay in ruins. Then, in 1974, catastrophe struck in the form of a devastating famine that swept through the country, killing hundreds of thousands of people and reducing entire communities to desperation. For Yunus, sitting in his university office teaching elegant economic theories while people were literally dying of hunger outside his door became an existential crisis of conscience. As he later reflected, "While I was teaching beautiful economic theories, people were dying. This was very hard to accept." This intellectual and moral rupture sent Yunus out of the classroom and into the villages. He established the Rural Economics Program at Chittagong University as an academic research project designed to engage directly with the economic realities of the poor. In 1975, he organized the Nabajug New Era, Tubhaga Kamar, a 3-share farm initiative that the Bangladesh government later adopted as the Packaged Input Program. These early experiments revealed Yunus's preference for practical, community-based economic intervention over purely theoretical analysis. The $27 loan that changed the world. The pivotal moment in Muhammad Yunus's life, and arguably in the history of global development finance, came in 1976 during visits to the impoverished village of Jobra, just a short distance from Chittagong University. Walking through the village with his students, Yunus encountered the daily economic reality of Bangladesh's rural poor with stark clarity. Among those he met was a woman who made bamboo stools. Despite her skill and labor, she earned just 2 cents of profit on each stool she sold. The reason was devastating in its simplicity. She had to borrow money from a local dealer to buy her raw bamboo supplies, and because of that debt, the dealer dictated the price at which she could sell her stools. She was trapped in a cycle of poverty not because she lacked ability or willingness to work, but because she lacked access to even a tiny amount of capital. Yunus began compiling a list of people in the village who were in similar predicaments, skilled, hard-working individuals who were being strangled by predatory moneylenders. The list grew to 42 people. The total amount of money they needed to escape the grip of the moneylenders and become economically self-sufficient? Just 856 taka, the equivalent of approximately $27 USD. Astounded by the smallness of the sum that stood between these people and economic liberation, Yunus reached into his own pocket and lent them the money himself. What happened next became one of the most cited experiments in the history of poverty alleviation. Every single borrower repaid the loan. The impact on their lives was immediate and tangible. This simple act of lending, revolutionary not because it was large but because it was small, and because it was given to those whom traditional banks considered unworthy of credit, became the intellectual and moral foundation for one of the most consequential financial institutions in human history. Convinced that his instinct was correct, that the poor, given fair access to credit, would repay their loans and could lift themselves out of poverty, Yunus approached traditional banks with a proposal to lend to the rural poor. The banks refused. The poor had no collateral, no credit history, and no institutional credibility. Undeterred, Yunus approached Janata Bank and offered himself personally as the guarantor of the loans. Janata Bank agreed, and in December 1976, Yunus's project to lend to the poor of Jobra was formally launched as an action research initiative of Chittagong University. The birth of Grameen Bank. Over the following years, Yunus's lending project expanded steadily, demonstrating consistently high repayment rates and transforming the lives of its borrowers. The concept proved scalable and resilient. After years of operation as a research project and then as a project of the Bangladesh Bank, the initiative was finally institutionalized. On October 2, 1983, by a special government ordinance, it was converted into a fully independent bank, Grameen Bank, the village bank. Grameen Bank was unlike any financial institution the world had seen before. It deliberately inverted every traditional banking assumption. Where conventional banks demanded collateral, Grameen offered loans without it. Where conventional banks sought out wealthy, creditworthy clients, Grameen specifically targeted the poor, and particularly poor women. Where conventional banks operated from urban centers with formal bureaucratic procedures, Grameen took itself to the villages and organized borrowers into small peer support groups who provided social accountability for repayments. The results were remarkable. By the time Yunus was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2006, Grameen Bank had provided loans totaling approximately $5 billion to millions of borrowers. By 2008, the bank had 7.5 million borrowers, 97% of whom were women, operating through 2,515 branches and serving more than 97% of all villages in Bangladesh. The repayment rate hovered near 100%, a statistic that demolished every conventional assumption about the creditworthiness of the poor. By July 2024, Grameen Bank had disbursed over $38.8 billion in microloans to 10.6 million borrowers. The implications of Grameen Bank extended far beyond Bangladesh. Microcredit institutions modeled on Grameen's approach were established in more than 100 countries across Asia, Africa, Latin America, and even the United States and Europe. Major commercial financial institutions, including Citibank, ABN AMRO, and Deutsche Bank, launched their own microloan divisions. The concept Yunus had developed from a $27 loan in a village in Bangladesh had fundamentally altered the landscape of global development finance. The Grameen family, building an ecosystem. Yunus's vision did not stop with the bank. Recognizing that poverty was not a single problem but a complex web of interrelated challenges. Lack of credit, yes, but also lack of healthcare, nutrition, housing, education, and communication. He expanded his work into what became known as the Grameen family of organizations. Each enterprise was designed to address a specific dimension of poverty while being economically self-sustaining. Grameen Phone, launched in the 1990s, brought mobile telecommunications to rural Bangladesh at a time when such technology seemed impossibly distant from the lives of the poor. Village women became telephone ladies, operating mobile phone services for their communities on a micro-enterprise basis. The company grew to become one of the largest mobile operators in Bangladesh. Grameen Shakti brought solar energy and renewable technology to rural households. Grameen Danone, a partnership with the French food giant Danone, produced affordable, nutrient-enriched yogurt for children, creating a social business model that combined commercial viability with nutritional intervention. Through these ventures, Yunus developed and refined the concept of social business, a category of enterprise distinct from both traditional profit-driven capitalism and conventional charity. A social business, in Yunus's formulation, is one that addresses a social problem through market mechanisms, generates enough revenue to be financially self-sustaining, but does not distribute dividends to shareholders. All surplus is reinvested into the business to expand its social impact. This concept, which Yunus articulated in a series of influential books, represented a fundamental rethinking of the relationship between business and society. Awards, recognition, and global influence. The international recognition that had been building throughout the 1980s and 1990s culminated in 2006 with the announcement that Muhammad Yunus and the Grameen Bank would be jointly awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. The Nobel Committee's citation stated that lasting peace cannot be achieved unless large population groups find ways in which to break out of poverty, and that Yunus and Grameen Bank have shown that even the poorest of the poor can work to bring about their own development. Yunus became not only the first Bangladeshi to receive the Nobel Peace Prize but the first Bangladeshi to win any Nobel Prize at all. The Nobel Prize was, however, only the most prominent of a long list of honors. Earlier recognition had come from Bangladesh itself in the form of the Independence Day Award in 1987, the country's highest civilian honor. The World Food Prize from the United States followed in 1994. He received the King Hussein Humanitarian Leadership Award from Jordan in 2000, the Volvo Environment Prize from Sweden in 2003, the Nikkei Asia Prize for Regional Growth from Japan in 2004, and the Franklin D. Roosevelt Freedom Award from the Netherlands in 2006. In 2009, President Barack Obama presented him with the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor in the United States. And in 2010 he received the United States Congressional Gold Medal. France inducted him as a member of the Légion d'honneur. In January 2008, Houston, Texas declared January 14th as Muhammad Yunus Day. In 2012, Fortune magazine named him one of the 12 greatest entrepreneurs of the modern era. Yunus also became a prominent member of global leadership networks. He was one of the founding members of the Elders, a group of world leaders convened by Nelson Mandela in 2007 to promote peace, justice, and human rights. He served on the Global Commission on Women's Health, the Advisory Council for Sustainable Economic Development, and the UN Expert Group on Women and Finance. He was appointed to the International Advisory Group for the Fourth World Conference on Women by the UN Secretary-General. Through books including Banker to the Poor, 2001, Building Social Business, 2010, Creating a World Without Poverty, 2008, and A World of Three Zeros, The New Economics of Zero Poverty, Zero Unemployment, and Zero Net Carbon Emissions, 2017, Yunus disseminated his ideas to global audiences, inspiring policymakers, entrepreneurs, and activists across every continent. Controversies and legal battles. The trajectory of Muhammad Yunus's life has not been without controversy. In 2007, during a period of political turmoil in Bangladesh, he briefly entered the political arena by announcing the formation of a new political party called Nagarik Shakti, Citizen Power, presenting himself as an alternative to the entrenched corruption of Bangladesh's established political parties. The announcement generated enormous interest and excitement, but Yunus ultimately withdrew from the venture in May 2007, citing insufficient political support. A more sustained and damaging conflict arose from the relationship between Yunus and the government of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. In 2010, Yunus became the subject of scrutiny following the release of a documentary film that alleged he and Grameen Bank had misappropriated funds donated by Norway. Both Yunus and Grameen Bank were eventually cleared by Norwegian authorities, but the Bangladeshi government launched its own investigations. In 2011, the Bangladesh government removed Yunus from his position as managing director of Grameen Bank on the grounds that he had exceeded the mandatory retirement age, a decision that was widely viewed by international observers and human rights organizations as politically motivated. The legal pressures on Yunus intensified further in subsequent years. In January 2024, a labor court in Bangladesh sentenced him, along with 3 colleagues from Grameen Telecom, to 6-month prison terms for violations of labor law. The court granted bail pending an appeal. Amnesty International described the conviction as a blatant abuse of the justice system and called for the charges to be dropped. The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights expressed concern that the legal proceedings were inconsistent with international standards. These legal battles were widely seen as part of a broader pattern of political persecution. Yunus himself repeatedly stated that the charges were fabricated and politically motivated, used to silence a prominent critic of the Hasina government. The conviction was ultimately overturned on August 7, 2024, just 1 day before Yunus was sworn in as chief advisor of Bangladesh's interim government. The July Revolution, history calls again. The defining final chapter of Muhammad Yunus's public life, at least as recorded to the present date, began in the summer of 2024. In July of that year, student protests erupted across Bangladesh, initially focused on a controversial quota system for government jobs that reserved a disproportionate share of civil service positions for descendants of freedom fighters from the 1971 Liberation War. The protests, organized under the banner of Students Against Discrimination, rapidly evolved into a broader anti-government movement demanding accountability for years of authoritarian rule, suppression of dissent, electoral manipulation, and corruption under the Hasina administration. The government's response was brutal. Security forces, alongside pro-government groups, attacked the protesters. An estimated 1,400 people were killed in the crackdown, a number that transformed a policy dispute into a mass uprising for democratic rights and human dignity. The protests continued to grow, spreading across all sectors of society. By early August, millions of people were demanding Sheikh Hasina's resignation. On August 5, 2024, Army Chief General Waqar announced that Hasina had resigned and fled to India. The era of Sheikh Hasina had ended. In the immediate aftermath of Hasina's departure, the Students Against Discrimination, the coordinating body of the uprising, convened urgently to identify who should lead the country's interim government. Their choice was unanimous. Muhammad Yunus, the Nobel laureate who was at that moment in Paris, whose international stature, moral credibility, and lifelong commitment to Bangladesh made him the only figure with the standing to stabilize the country and guide it toward democratic transition. On August 6, 2024, President Mohammad Shahabuddin formally dissolved parliament and asked Yunus to form an interim government. Yunus accepted. On August 8, 2024, Muhammad Yunus was sworn in as the chief advisor of Bangladesh, effectively the head of government, by President Mohammad Shahabuddin at the Bangabhavan. He was joined in the oath-taking ceremony by 16 advisors who would form his cabinet. At the age of 84, having spent decades fighting poverty, building institutions, writing books, and defending himself in courts, Yunus assumed the most consequential role of his extraordinary life: chief advisor, governing a nation in transition. The challenges that confronted Yunus upon assuming office were immense. Bangladesh was emerging from the trauma of a mass uprising. Hundreds had been killed, thousands injured. The police force had effectively gone on strike and abandoned its stations during the protests. Law and order had broken down in many parts of the country. The economy had been destabilized. And politically, the country faced a constitutional vacuum. The Constitution of Bangladesh had not provided for an interim government since 2011, creating a situation without clear legal precedent. The Supreme Court's Appellate Division addressed this by invoking the doctrine of necessity, affirming the legality of the Yunus-led government on August 9, 2024. Yunus moved quickly to stabilize the country. He visited injured protesters in Dhaka Medical College Hospital on the day after his swearing-in ceremony. He traveled to Rangpur to visit wounded students in the Rangpur Medical College. He donated 1 billion Bangladeshi taka from the Chief Advisor's Relief Fund to support the families of those killed or injured in the uprising. On September 17, 2024, the Jalai Shaheed Smriti Foundation was launched to provide ongoing support for victims and their families. The government also lifted the ban on Jamaat-e-Islami that had been imposed by the Hasina government during the height of the protests, signaling a commitment to political pluralism. The Yunus government immediately set about establishing reform commissions to address the structural problems that had enabled authoritarian rule. 11 reform commissions were created, covering the constitution, the electoral system, the judiciary, the police, the civil service, the anti-corruption commission, and other critical institutions. A constitutional reform commission was tasked with drafting revisions to the Constitution of Bangladesh. A national consensus commission was established to build agreement among political parties on the shape of the reforms. On the international stage, Yunus deployed his extraordinary network of relationships to Bangladesh's advantage. Leveraging the credibility that came with his Nobel laureate status and decades of global engagement, he assembled a broad international coalition of support for Bangladesh's democratic transition. Relations with the United States, which had been strained under Hasina, were restored. After months of engagement with the U.S. administration, in July 2025, Bangladesh secured a new trade framework with Washington under which Bangladeshi exports to the United States would face a competitive 20% tariff, a crucial outcome for the country's enormous garment industry, which employs millions and generates the bulk of Bangladesh's export earnings. Yunus also made significant diplomatic strides in his relationship with China. During a state visit to Beijing in March 2025, he secured approximately $2.9 billion in loans, investments, and grants, a sum dramatically larger than what his predecessor had received during her own visit to China just months earlier. Nearly 30 Chinese companies additionally pledged over $1 billion to establish a Chinese industrial economic zone in Chattogram. The Bangladesh-China relationship deepened considerably during this period, though it generated some tension with India, Bangladesh's historically close neighbor, particularly after remarks Yunus made in Beijing about the economic potential of China's Belt and Road Initiative in the region. India's response included restrictions on visa issuance and port access, creating a diplomatic friction that the Yunus government worked to manage throughout 2025. Major initiatives and reforms under Yunus. Among the most consequential domestic decisions of the Yunus government was the banning of the Awami League, the party of former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, under the Anti-Terrorism Act in April 2025, following sustained pressure from political groups and the National Citizen Party. This decision, which effectively excluded the Awami League from participation in upcoming elections, was welcomed by many of the protest movement's supporters but criticized by international human rights organizations including Human Rights Watch, which called the broad ban an excessive restriction of freedom of association. The government also established the International Crimes Tribunal to try those responsible for the killings during the July-August 2024 crackdown. This court moved to bring charges against senior military and intelligence officials as well as political figures. In November 2025, the tribunal issued a death sentence against Sheikh Hasina, who remained in exile in India. A verdict Hasina condemned as politically motivated. A memorial museum was established on the grounds of Hasina's former official residence in Dhaka to commemorate the victims of the crackdown. On the technology and infrastructure front, Yunus displayed ambition commensurate with his global vision. In March 2025, he announced that Bangladesh would finalize a commercial agreement with SpaceX's Starlink to provide satellite internet access across the nation, with a particular focus on reaching rural and underserved communities. Yunus framed the initiative in terms that reflected his lifelong priorities: expanding access to education, health services, and entrepreneurial opportunity for those at the bottom of the economic pyramid, while also preventing future governments from being able to shut down the internet during periods of political unrest. In April 2025, Yunus addressed the 81st session of the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, reaffirming Bangladesh's commitment to building a climate-resilient and inclusive digital economy and highlighting the government's investments in green infrastructure, sustainable housing, and nature-based development solutions. In August 2025, on the first anniversary of the July Revolution, Yunus formally read out the July Declaration at the National Parliament building, a historic political document enshrining the principles of the revolution and committing to democratic reforms, inclusive governance, and national unity. The government also pursued economic stabilization with some success. Inflation, which had reached 11.6% in July 2024, eased to 9.05% by May 2025. Merchandise exports showed resilience, with ready-made garment exports growing by approximately 10% during this period. However, youth unemployment remained a serious concern, and an estimated 2.1 million jobs had been lost in the economic disruption of the transition period. Challenges, tensions, and the path to elections. The Yunus government was not without its serious challenges and internal tensions. Criticism came from multiple directions. Human rights organizations expressed concern about the government's inability to fully protect journalists, with reports of hundreds of incidents of harassment and violence against media workers during the interim period. Civil servants organized strikes in protest against a government ordinance that amended the Public Service Act in ways they felt threatened their job security. In May 2025, Yunus himself reportedly expressed frustration with the pace of reform and the lack of political consensus, and, according to multiple reports, privately expressed a desire to resign, though he ultimately continued in office. Relations with the military became a source of significant tension. The Bangladesh Army, which had remained deployed since the July uprising, and its Chief General Waqar publicly called for elections to be held by December 2025, at odds with the Yunus government's preferred timeline of mid-2026. The army chief also expressed reservations about several of the government's key initiatives, including the Starlink agreement and proposals related to the management of Chattogram port. These civil-military tensions, described in local media as a Cold War, cast a shadow over the government's final months in office. Despite these challenges, the Yunus government ultimately fulfilled its central promise, delivering free and fair elections. In February 2026, Bangladesh held its general election, the first genuinely competitive national election in years. The Bangladesh Nationalist Party, led by Tariq Rahman, emerged victorious in a landslide. On February 17, 2026, Tariq Rahman was sworn in as Prime Minister, formally ending the Yunus-led interim government. Muhammad Yunus left the government residence on February 28, 2026, his mission completed. Recognition in his final years of leadership. Even as he navigated the turbulent waters of governance, the international community continued to recognize Yunus's extraordinary contributions. In 2024, his name was listed among the 500 most influential Muslims in the world. In 2025, Time magazine named him one of the 100 most influential people in the world, recognition that reflected both his historical achievements and his ongoing impact as a leader. He attended the World Economic Forum in Davos in January 2025, where he represented Bangladesh on the global stage, articulating his vision for a world of 3 zeros: zero poverty, zero unemployment, and zero net carbon emissions. He also participated in the Paris 2024 Olympics in an advisory capacity, promoting social business principles and sustainability in the Games' planning and execution. His global outreach included meetings with world leaders from UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres to Chinese President Xi Jinping to Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, demonstrating that at the age of 84 he retained the energy, the intellectual vitality, and the international standing to engage as an equal with the most powerful figures on the world stage. Legacy: a life that defied convention. The life of Muhammad Yunus defies easy categorization. He is an economist who chose the village over the ivory tower. A banker who chose the poorest of the poor over the wealthiest of the wealthy. A Nobel laureate who chose public service over personal comfort. A man who, in his mid-80s, chose to shoulder the immense burden of governing a nation in crisis rather than rest on the extraordinary achievements of a lifetime. What unifies the many chapters of his story is a single conviction, arrived at in the devastating aftermath of famine and suffering, that poverty is not inevitable. That the poor are not poor because they are lazy or incapable, but because the systems surrounding them have failed them, denied them credit, denied them opportunity, denied them the basic dignity of economic agency. And that with the right tools, a small loan, a fair rate of interest, the respect of being treated as a creditworthy human being, they can and will lift themselves out of poverty. This conviction has not only transformed the lives of tens of millions of people in Bangladesh and around the world, it has reshaped the global conversation about development, poverty, finance, and the role of business in society. The Grameen Bank model has been replicated in more than 100 countries. The concept of social business has inspired a generation of entrepreneurs. And the spectacle of an 84-year-old Nobel laureate leaving a comfortable life in Paris to return home and lead his country through one of its most difficult moments speaks to a quality of character that transcends the ordinary measures of human achievement. Muhammad Yunus began with $27 lent from his own pocket to 42 women in a village. He ended his formal chapter of public service having led 170 million people through a democratic revolution and guided them toward a new political beginning. The distance between those two moments is a measure not just of one man's life, but of what is possible when human beings refuse to accept the world as it is and insist, with patience and courage and creativity, on building the world as it should be.